Welcome to another edition of How to Fix It Yourself with Dave and Dave. In this edition, we're going to show you how to do electrical when you're adding something onto a vehicle. Now, the vehicle we've chosen to do this on is a 2023 Tacoma TRD. We're actually doing the electrical to go with the heated seats that we put into the vehicle. But this works in general for any kind of electrical addition that you're going to do to the car, whether you're putting on additional lights, trim lights, bar lights, whatever else you're going to add, major speaker elements in the back, whatever. There's a little bit of nuance to doing it right versus how most people tell you how to do it. So we're going to go ahead and show that, and it'll be generically valuable for any time you're adding electrical to your car or additional items to your car. We'll also show you how to hook up the heaters on the seats, just because that's what this one is all about. But if you want more details on how to add heaters to your seats, please view our other video where we cover that topic. So this relay is going to interrupt the circuit. Now what we have here is we have the activators going to what was represented here as the fuse box. Now it doesn't take very much power to activate a relay. So this relay has got to be able to take 10 amps. So you'll notice later on that when we measure the amperage on the heat seaters, each set of heat seaters, so the passenger heat seater takes about 5 amps. The driver's heat seater takes about 5 amps, so in total that's 10 amps. And you don't want to be tapping into a circuit that you're going to draw 10 amps from, where that circuit is designed to carry power to some other part of the car, because you're going to overload that circuit. We'll talk about that a little later when we actually do the install. So what we have here in this one is this is representing the switch fuse in the fuse box. So is that when you tap into that fuse, you're pulling just a little less than half an amp at the most, and so you're not going to overload that circuit to activate this fuse. So from here on out is the harness and everything that you get from the factory when you want to install the heat seaters. So this represents the power source. This represents the material you're going to get from the factory for the heat seaters. So just to identify the different pieces, we've got the fuse here, which you do want the fuse to protect your heat seaters if you overload those. Do not rely on the fuse that you tap into, because that's not going to work. Then from the fuse we go into the power harness, which has both a power line and a ground line. So this is going to be attached to the frame somewhere. So we've got this running back to our power supply here, representing the frame of the car. Then we have the switch to turn on and off the heat seaters, and then we have the relay that the heat seaters have. So is that this relay will not activate until you turn on the switch. And so you'll notice that we take a tap off of the power line here to the heat seater relay, and then that goes to ground, which goes to this one here, and that's all buried inside all of the connectors here. So you don't actually see that, but that's the switch. All the switch does is activate this relay, because you're not going to pull 5 amps through this switch. So that activates the relay, which activates the power to the heat seaters. So this is the best way to hook up the heat seaters. If you just tap directly with this line into another power source on the car, you're going to overload that power source potentially. I know a lot of people say, well, plug it into the cigarette lighter, because it's a 15 amp cigarette lighter and nobody uses the cigarette lighter anymore. Okay, that's great. You're pulling 10 amps on that cigarette lighter, that 5 amp fuse. Now someone wants to power their laptop, and so they plug their laptop power supply through an inverter that goes into the cigarette lighter, and that's going to pull 15 amps. and now all of a sudden you've got 25 or 30 amps going through that 15 amp circuit, and you're going to blow the circuit. So we really do not recommend you just tap into any old power line on the car. It doesn't make any sense, and it's likely to overload things. So we're going to step through this and show you how it all works, and in theory, so as you can understand how it's going to actually work in the car. So right now, we've got our battery set for 13.4 amps. We're not getting any power to the seat heaters over here. Okay, so now we're going to turn on the ignition switch. You'll notice that we're pulling almost no amps, but we're pulling the 13.4 volts that you get from the battery. So we're not overloading any circuit, but this relay now is activated. So until we turn on the switch, nothing's going to go to the seat heaters. So now at this point, we're going to go ahead and turn on the switch. You notice the light comes on, and you'll notice here that we're now pulling 4.6 amps. So now we've got the circuit working. So this is now allowing the battery to go to the harness, to the seat heaters. And you'll notice now that they are getting warm. So just to demonstrate that they are actually working, we have a temperature gun here. And you can see that the temperature gun is going up as they get hotter and hotter. Of course, this is one that is a real spot, so it depends on the exact spot I'm hitting as to what you're going to see. But if you look out at the table, we're at 83 degrees, 84 degrees, and in here, we're now running somewhere close to 100 degrees on that. So it's definitely warming up on both sides, and so we now have that going. So let's say we forget to turn off the switch, and we flip the ignition switch off. And so we come over here and we turn our ignition switch off, and we get out of the car, and you'll notice here that now our amperage to the seat heaters have dropped to nothing. And so we're no longer powering the seat heaters, we're no longer going to drain the battery. So that's the beauty of setting it up this way. We're not overloading the circuit, and we're allowing the ignition switch to determine when we get power to the seat heaters. So before you begin, you want to check each of the seat heaters to make sure that you have continuity through the heat seater. So what we've got here is we've got a voltmeter, we've got it set on ohms, and we're going to get our probes in here and touch both of the leads in there, and you'll notice that we get about 5 ohms, which is a good ohms rating for a heater. So, and you want to do that on both of them. So you make sure that when you get them from the factory that they're good. Okay, so we've got them good on both of them. Now, when you put the heaters in, you're going to probably have to slice through here and here. You notice we've got a small separation, and we'll show that here when we actually do the install. But afterwards, you get that in, you'll want to recheck that ohms on these to make sure you haven't cut any of these wires and made your so your seat heater is not working properly. Because if you cut any of these, then that circuit is not going to work effectively, and you're going to get a drop in the ratings on this. So that's just a little check that you want to do both before and after you actually do the install on your heaters. So what we have here is we have 2 wires that we're going to feed through the firewall. So the red one is got is the power line. The blue one is the actuator for the relays. So the red one's got to pull 10 amps. The blue one here, which is much smaller, has only got to pull about 1/4 of an amp. So not very much. So in the Tacoma, we have back here on the firewall, we have a feed through back here on the firewall with two nipples that you can run additional cables through. So we've clipped the top of the bottom cable. We put the baling wire through there, and we've attached the two cables to, or the two wires to that. And so we're going to pull all of those down through that firewall, and then we can take and tape that off nicely and keep it from having an air leak through there. So that's what we're going to do next, is pull those wires and get that through the firewall. So we're going to come down. We're going to come down here, plenty of room, go across the back. I'll follow that guy all the way around. Then again, give plenty of room when you cut it. So we have the red wire here, which is going to carry our main power to our seats. It's a 14 gauge. It's going to be more than enough to carry the 10 amps for the two seats. The one seat takes 5 amps, the other seat takes 5 amps, so that's 10. This is for the actuators, which take a 1/4 amp. And so we have two actuators, so we have a 1/2 amp. And this is a little 16 gauge. It's going to be just fine. So here's the trick. You notice that this tab that we're going to use is on continuously. And that would drain the battery if we had that going right to the seats. So we're going to run this one, as we've mentioned before, in the opening area, to the relay, which is going to be switched by this guy right here, this 15 amp fuse. Now you'll notice that the 15 amp fuse doesn't have any power right now. So now when we turn on the ignition, you'll notice that we now have power to this fuse. And now when we turn off the ignition, then it takes a few minutes, but you notice that the power now goes off of this fuse here. So what that's going to do is deactivate that relay that the power is being fed to, so that it's impossible to drain the battery. Now we could use any of these fuses here for the tap, because we're only pulling less than a 1/2 amp on those. But we're going to go ahead and use this 15 amp just because it's real close and convenient. Now the attachment for the 15 amp we're going to use is going to be this guy right here, which has a double fuse on it. So this fuse is a 15 amp fuse that goes with this setup right here. So the power leg goes up through both of these, and then it comes out here. So this is the attachment we're going to use to go in place of that 15 amp fuse. This goes into the fuse slot, and this is the 15 amp fuse that replaces the one that was in the fuse slot. The power leg goes up to this one here and feeds this wire here as well. And so that's how we're going to go ahead and attach that, so as that we get the 15 amp fuse working properly for whatever circuit that was, and we get the 10 amp fuse working for our relay. Now, just because of convenience, we're going to put it in this direction, just so as that we can wrap the wires easier. And so this is be putting that in there. And so now we've got that in place, and so now we can connect the wires. Okay, so we're going to wrap the blue wire back around here, and we're going to attach it into this squeeze clamp here. So is that we put that in there, and then we go ahead and cinch it down. I like to start at the top and work my way down. Make sure you get a good solid crimp on those. Okay, and after you get it all done, you want to pull on it and make sure you got a good solid connection. So I've got a good solid connection for that one. So we're now just going to wrap this wire into place so that it's nice and neat in here and it's not interfering with anything. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on then is going to be the power line. Now for that, we need to use a spade clip. So the spade clip is going to go in here on this one, which we showed earlier is always on. And of course it's being regulated by that relay. So that's where this is going to attach. So we're going to put that in here, squeeze it tight, and then that'll attach to that one. So we'll go ahead and put that in, taking, again, working our way down. Make sure we've got it on there good and solid. And then we'll put that spade clip on. Okay. We'll make sure it's down on there real good and solid. And then we'll route our power wire through there so that it's out of the way and everything looks nice and neat. So this has definitely been a little more work than just splicing into any old cable that you can find under the dash, but it's a safer way to go. And you're going to make sure that you're not overloading any circuits, because all the circuits are factory original power and fused. And we've just added an additional one. The only additional tap here is that 1/2 amp, which isn't going to make much of a difference on a 15 amp fuse. So this looks factory original, at least when you put the cover back on. Everything will look like it's just supposed to be. We've got everything in a nice high temperature cover going across the back of the dash and going on in through the firewall. So this is the right way to do it, and this is the proper way to do it. And this doesn't matter whether you're doing heated seats or lights or anything that takes additional power. This is the right way to do these things so that you're not messing up any other circuits in your car. So now what we're doing, now that we've actually got the way of pulling the cable through, so we fished some pull lines through, and now what we're going to do is we're going to now mount the switch into one of the empty plugs, as you saw in the video that we've just ran. You saw how we pulled that through. So the trick now is going to be to drill a hole in this that'll match with the switch so that we can pull that through. Then when we connect this to the pull lines and pull them on through, then that'll snug right up to the dash and it'll look very professional. So the first thing we want to do, if you have a instruction manual, it'll give you some measurements for these, but you always want to check. So I've got a good quality micrometer here, and we're going to go ahead and check. They may give it to you in millimeters, so you'll have to convert it. So this is running just a little over 3/4 of an inch on this. So we'll go ahead and use a 3/4 of an inch drill bit to open this up, and then we'll just wallow it out with a box cutter. In order to find the center of this, so you don't get off center and cut into the sides, because we just barely have enough room to get this switch in here. First thing we're going to do is put a piece of tape on there so we can mark. And what you want to do is come up here and mark each one of the corners. And then you want to make an X through there. So you line up the corners. And that'll give you the exact center. So that'll give you the exact center that you want to drill into. Now, a 3/4 inch bit is going to wander on this quite a bit. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drill 2 pilot holes. And the first pilot hole is just to get a good start on the center. The second pilot hole is to be big enough so that the center of this bit locks up in the middle of the insert there. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to go ahead and hit that center with a small bit so we don't get any wander. Right, so now we're going to drill the secondary pilot hole. Now I'm not clamping this very tight because I don't want to accidentally break the plastic. So, you know, you want it just a little snug, but not too snug. All right. So now we're going to just kind of sneak this in here. And that happens with plastic. So now we've got our hole. And we did get, unfortunately, a little bit of wander, but that won't be a big deal because the flange on the switch will cover that up. So now we're just going to take a few minutes here and just kind of clean it up with a box cutter. We're also going to notch this point right here because this does have an alignment notch on it so that it stays in the right direction. It doesn't twist while it's in the car and while you're using it. So I'm going to take a few minutes and just kind of clean this up and kind of open it up and make sure it fits. And then we'll put the switch in. I've carved out the inside a little bit more to open it up just a little bit. Made the top and bottom where the crimps go a little bit further open, and I created a slot for the alignment bit there. So we've kind of done a couple of dry fits, did a little more carving, and now I think we're ready to put this in. So we've got enough room. We're now just going to take and snap that on in. And other than a little bit of a divot that we got right there, unfortunately, it is in, and it matches the rest of it nicely. So that'll work real well in the dash. So the next challenge is trying to get the wires from the switches down to where you can actually get at them, connect them into the rest of the harness. Now we had to do a little bit of a roundabout to get to them. We fit both of them back through the driver's side and then underneath the tunnel where there's quite a bit of room. We couldn't go directly from the switches over to the passenger side. So again, this is something that you just have to fish around, look for, be patient. But if you just take your time and work it through, you'll be able to get the switches put in and make them look nice and professional, just like we did. Run the wires without removing any parts of the dash or anything like that. I've always found you eventually get to that spot when you're doing it, so you might as well go ahead and do it up front. We remove part of the dash underneath the glove box. We also remove part of the dash underneath the steering wheel. Underneath the steering wheel is an airbag, and we had to remove that airbag completely in order to get access to the voids that we needed to run the wires. So again, if you're going to remove that airbag and you need to, be sure you disconnect the negative terminal on your battery before you remove the airbag. We went ahead and pulled the switch cables through. We've now pushed the heater cable back through to the other side for the other seat. We haven't got the heater cable for this seat in yet because we're going to now wire up everything. So we're now on the passenger side. So in order to get back in here to be able to put all the wires in, here's the wires that we've fed through the firewall that we're going to hook up to the relay. Here's the relay wires here. We've mounted the relay back up in here. Now in order to get at all this stuff, you need to pull the airbag out of from underneath your glove box here. And in order to do that, the first thing you need to do is you've got to pull this panel off right there. So this flip panel comes out, and then this pops straight out, and then you can get at the two bolts that are on this side of the airbag, and there's another bolt on the other side under there. Now the clip for getting the airbag loose is a little bit tricky because it's not common to the other airbag ones. You've got to pop out this center yellow piece and pull it almost all the way out, and then it'll pull straight out from the connector right there. So that's all the prep work you need to do in order to get access up into here to be able to do the wiring. So that's the next step, is we'll connect all the wires together, and with that much room, you can just tuck things back up underneath the carpet and let the carpet hold it, or you can zip tie them into little coils up underneath, whatever your preference is. All right, just so that we can show you that in real life how this really works, and now that we've got it all wired up to the car. So what we have here is we have this red clip right here is to the one of the power sides of the relay, master relay. This wire over here is coming from the fuse box that we wired through the firewall. So that's going to the other side of the relay. This is the control line on the relay that comes from the fuse box. And this is the grounds all tied together, one to the relay and one to the heated seats. And the other one goes to the ground clip over here on the side of the firewall. And so right now you can see that we're not activating anything and the power is off. So now we're going to turn the car on and show that we actually get power through that relay. So now we're going to turn the switch on. Okay, so now you can see that we have power coming into the line here from the relay. So now that's going to, at this point, we haven't connected it yet, but that's going to now connect through the fuse, through the 7.5 amp fuse, to this wire here, which will go to the heated seats, and indirectly through the switch and the other relay that we showed you. So that just goes to show that we've got this all wired up right, and it actually really works. So the only time that this line gets power is going to be when the ignition is on, and when it's off, then it shuts everything down regardless of the position of the switches on the dashboard. All right, so we finished getting all the wires together. We haven't zip tied them together or put them where we're going to do it, but there's a little cavity right here, and we're going to just lay everything back into this area here, and it'll be out of the way. We're not going to try and zip tie it up underneath the dash, but that's your choice as to what you want to do. So once again, we've got the main power line coming in here, picking up to the main power line to the activation relay. Then the power out comes out here and goes to the two fuses. Now these are 7.5 amp fuses. The seats run about 5 amps, so that's a good margin. And then we've got the two seat harnesses here going away from that. Then we've got all the grounds connected here, and the ground line going over to a spot on the sidewall. The activation relay, or activation connection on the relay, is this blue line right here. And again, the activation relay ground line goes here to the ground area. Now this, if you remember, we put a fuse, secondary fuse into the fuse box for this. This is protected by a 3 amp fuse. We chose 3 amps because it's this is only pulling about a 1/2 amp, and so if it shorts out, we don't want to have a bigger fuse in there. We want it to go ahead and blow fairly quickly. This one here is protected by a 10 amp fuse, and so, or no, this one is connected directly to the battery, excuse me. So this one goes directly to the battery, and then the battery gets interrupted there at that. Over here is where we got the connections from the wire harnesses to the seats. So the one side here goes to the driver's side, the other one goes up here to the passenger side. The passenger side one we ran underneath the carpet here and across here and down over into here, and then back up underneath the seat to connect to the seats. We'll show you here in a little bit what it looks like over on the driver's side, all connected together. So we're just going to put everything back together again, get the airbag, yeah, thank you. get the airbag put back up in here and get all set up, get the side paneling all put back together again, and we'll be good to go. Well, now that we're getting close to wrapping up, I wanted to re-emphasize a little bit about why we did what we did, just because I really want to focus on that so that you just don't go, oh, I'm just going to shortcut this or that. So one of the things we did was we put a double fuse into one of the fuse slots. Now, a lot of people tell you, well, you've got the pigtail out there, just tap that right into your seat heaters and be done with it. You know, why go to all the rest of the trouble? Well, part of the issue is we did use a 12 amp fuse, and the wire feeding that 12 amp fuse is spec'd to probably 15, 16 amps, something like that. They don't put big wires in just to be putting big wires in. So let's say you go ahead and try and feed both of them off of that one fuse slot. Then you've got the regular 12 amp fuse that is designed for that particular circuit, and now you're adding an additional 10 amps on top of that. And while they're two different fuses, so it's not going to be a fuse problem, you may have a problem with the wire feeding the fuse, because if that wire is a 15 amp fuse and the 12 amp fuse is protecting a 8 or 9 amp circuit, now you're adding 10 amps on top of that. You're now at 18, 19 amps into a wire that's designed for maybe 15 or 16 amps at the most. Eventually that wire is going to break down if it consistently pulls more and more amperage than what it's supposed to do. So again, another plea, use a separate hot circuit and use the tap into your fuse box only to activate that relay so as that you're not overloading any circuits accidentally. I know a lot of people do. They double fuse and then they put the load directly on that double fuse. It's not a really good idea, and I just wanted to re-emphasize that to make sure that you think hard about doing any shortcuts and not doing it the absolute proper way. So now we finished running the electrical. As you can see, it can be a bit tricky just because there's a lot of tight spaces and got to figure out where things go. You've got to be able to run some wires in places that are not necessarily obvious that you want to run those wires to. But if you search carefully and are diligent in terms of being careful, you can find ways of getting those through with, into the cab area from the battery and the engine compartment in a way that will make everything look nice, look professional. And you, again, you use this for any time you're adding lights or adding any kind of electrical. It's very important not to just tap into an existing line because you're going to overload that fuse. So in this case, we're putting in heated seats, and each seat requires about 5 amps, so that's a 10 amp draw for the two seats. And what fuse are you going to use? If you tap it into a 15 amp fuse, you're going to be taking 10 amps of that 15 amp fuse. That 15 amp fuse is there to protect a circuit that's probably 10 or 12 amps in and of itself. And so you're putting your vehicle and your other accessories or items in jeopardy by just tapping into lines. So this is why we've done it this way. This is why we're showing you in detail exactly how to do it. We've showed you bench setups so you can see it in bench. We've got a diagram, schematic for you to look at so you can see how all the elements work together. And again, it's very time consuming. It's got a lot of nuances to it. But in the end, you'll be much happier with your results, and you'll be sure that your automobile is going to be safe and be electrically powered properly. So hopefully this has been a good video for you. Please hit the subscribe button and the like button, and then look for any tools or accessories that we've used in putting this together in the comments below. Thank you very much.